Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Debating for America's Youth. Today we have another awesome interview. Today we're interviewing the 2020 NSDA National Champion and original Oratory. Today we're interviewing Addison Fulton. Welcome.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're here and able to help the other members of the speech and debate community. So my first question is, how did you get started in speech and debate, and what made you want to join the activity?
All right. So my speech coach at my school, I'd actually known for a long time before I started speech and debate. She was a teacher at an acting camp I went to when I was like 10 years old. And then she took the coaching position at my school, and I had her as a drama teacher, and she recommended I try speech and debate. And I was like, well, it's my friend, it's this person I've known for such a long time, I'll give it a go. So I was actually recruited to speech and debate, but what kept me coming back was I loved the creative control I could have. I liked that I could express and put into the world what I wanted to put into the world, and I didn't really have to answer to anybody too much. You know, when you're doing stuff like theater or when you're doing film, there's a lot of elements of those creative expressions that are outside of your control. There's, will you get cast? Will your production get greenlit? Will stuff fall into place? But you don't have to worry about that quite as much with speech and debate. You can just create what you want and send it out into the world.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that's a really good reason to join. In terms of speech and debate, how do you practice? Like, what is your like way or outlet of like practicing to get better at your speech?
So there's different practice methods depending on where you're at for your speech, I've always noticed. A lot of the time for me, when I'm first starting out with a speech and it's just been written and I'm just getting to this point where I'm just starting to memorize it, it's sort of early days, I find it really difficult because it can be kind of awkward and weirdly vulnerable to practice something that you're not super comfortable with. So that is when I usually practice just for myself. I'll practice for mirrors. I'll do it just for myself. And that's when you can really play around and have fun with it and test what might work, what might not, because you don't have to show it to anybody. You're free to just mess around. And then when you're starting to get a little bit more practiced with the speech, then I like to show it to as many people as possible, because each person is going to have a different reaction to a speech. Each person is going to have different thoughts and opinions and ideas. So once I'm past that awkward, I don't want to show it to anybody, oh, it's so bad, it's so weird, I'm like, do you have 10 minutes and will you listen to this? And honestly, I think that diversity of opinions and getting as many opinions as possible not only helps you get a speech that a lot of people are going to enjoy, a lot of people are going to connect to, but it also helps you keep your script fresh. I know a lot of people with speech and debate can kind of get burned out on a script or on an idea. And I think when you're practicing, especially as it gets later in the season, as it gets later in the year, it's important to practice it for more people to get new ideas and to get inspiration to help keep things fresh so you don't get bored of it.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. In terms of like, so you won the national tournament and you had to compete against a lot of awesome people, especially in the final round. What made your speech stand out to the judge versus everyone else who was really, really good in that final round?
Excellent question. I'd have to say I and my coach, we both have a background in film. We have both worked on film projects before, and when we moved to the online nationals, we both had this thought of, we should get creative with the camera. We should let ourselves have some fun with distance from the camera and almost treat this as though it were a film rather than a filmed speech, and let the camera be a part of it rather than just a necessary evil, a necessary tool. So I think a part of it was that variety with the camera. Another part of it is I always want to be funny. I want to make people laugh. I want to make sure people stay engaged with my speeches. So my sort of joke to fact ratio might have been a little higher than some of my competitors, which, you know, depending on who you ask, helps you or hurts you. Because I've definitely had judges say there's too much humor in this compared to factual and rhetoric compared to that content. But some people prefer something that's a little funnier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What is your process for coming up with a topic? You talked about keeping your script fresh. How do you come up with those scripts and those speeches for the rounds?
Coming up with a topic is definitely one of the most challenging parts of original oratory. My process is usually, I look at something that frustrates me in the world, some issue that I am faced with on a daily basis. And then I try and break it down into something that is small and relatable. So how we came up with dress codes was, it's one of the most daily manifestations of sexism in our society today. So we wanted to discuss how that perpetuated sexism, how it was an example of sexism, because sexism itself is a very broad and out there topic. And when you have those broad topics, it can sometimes be difficult to find research, to find statistics, and it can get a little dull simply because it's so wide. You almost don't have anything to hang it on. There's not a daily experience that you can point to and go, I'm doing a speech because of this. But when you're, this was an advice I learned from a writing class, actually. And it was when it was talking about how to discuss some of the biggest issues in the world. And one of the things it said was, when you're writing about war, you don't write about war. You write about a little kid's teddy bear that they dropped when they ran away from a bomb. You know, you don't tackle the big things. You tackle the little things that are a part of a big thing, and that can help you get more specific with your research, get more specific with your topic. And I think that really helps me find what I want to talk about. I just look at a big picture and break it down into something little.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And Mother Teresa had a quote, I don't remember it exactly off the top of my head, but it was something around the fact that it's kind of hard to comprehend a big topic when you're just given it, right? But when you're look at a specific person and a real story, it really makes more sense to you. I mean, and that completely makes sense. I've heard some study that humans can't comprehend numbers of over it's 2,000 or something like that. So when you're explaining something like that, you break it down to a smaller individual and say imagine that was you, right? Then people can relate to it more. I completely agree with that. And that makes a lot of sense for coming up with a topic. And that seems to be a lot of good speeches will center around something smaller that's a bigger problem in the country.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for a novice who's just getting started in speech and debate? Any advice for them?
The advice. Find something that feels right to you. If a topic doesn't feel like something you care about, if it doesn't fill you with energy and excitement to think about performing it, to think about sharing it, then you might consider another topic. And the other bit of advice I would have is, everybody up there, everybody who performs, everybody who does any sort of speech at any time is making an idiot of themselves. You're making some sort of a fool of yourself anytime you perform for another human being. Embrace that. Lean into it. Don't let yourself be scared of looking like an idiot, because everybody looks like a little bit of an idiot up there. But the less afraid you are of looking silly while you're performing, the more into it your audience is going to be. I know it's vulnerable to sort of lose that restraint and that self-consciousness when you perform, but in losing that, you invite your audience to experience something beautiful with you.
That makes a lot of sense. And then the final question of this interview is, do you have a message for the speech and debate community that you would like to share right now?
I do. My message that I would like to share is that people are still listening and people still want to hear what you have to say. I know a lot of us are longing for that feeling of performing in front of an audience again. I know I, for one, really miss just rooms full of people. I miss that energy. But there are still people on the other side of the screen who are listening and watching and really care about what you have to say. I know right now I even have like this weird ongoing crisis of like, is it worth it? What's the point? But it is worth it. And there is a point, and people are watching. And what we do at this activity, with this activity, it matters. And people will think that. People will think whatever you have to say, whatever you have to share with the world, there are people who think it matters just as much as you do. And so share it for those people.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your advice for the speech and debate community.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.